the Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast featuring the Crop Doctors.
Good morning from the Crop Doctors Podcast studio in Stoneville. I caught Tom sitting still for a few minutes today.
Coming back into town is what it was. It's NAIC's over. My major national meeting is over today, but I left last night just for the sheer amount of things that go on this time of the year. I had to get out of there.
Y'all need to schedule better. Having meetings over the weekend is a scheduling flaw.
I have decided that my professional society focuses on the fact that it's pretty much immediately before the college school year starts, and the bulk of those folks teach.
So?
No, I agree, and run lab programs, because those of us that are field level applied folks stand there and scratch our heads like, seriously, why are we having this meeting right now? All of us need to be walking plots.
I'll give you a meeting that I have to get to on a Sunday afternoon because it starts on Monday morning, but I'm not going to meet on Sunday. I don't care if it's July or February.
Well, there were a lot of folks that met on Saturday.
They need more interesting things to do.
Some of them do. Yes, I will agree with that.
So Tom's rating plots. Oh, as this is coming out of my mouth, it just occurred to me, I think I may have asked you this before, Tom. Well, I'll add to it. So would you rather walk corn plots in July or walk a flooded rice field in July, or wet cotton in July? And the rice may or may not be wet, but you'd have hip boots on walking across a flooded rice field.
I was just going to say, I'm going to have to probably lean towards the rice in that situation, because the cotton's just going to be nasty. And that's not to offend anybody that's a cotton grower. Everybody knows. And corn is just difficult to walk when it's hot outside.
You know, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I honestly didn't see it coming when I started the answer because this time of the year I feel like, and Tracy, my wife, just laughs. You know, you come home and you smell like a fish. I can tell you've been walking corn. I'm like, yeah, no, I know. Dirty shirt, dirty shoulders. The shoulders just get nasty. Doesn't matter how wide the rows are, and all our stuff's 40s. But then the hybrid trials of Brad plants are all 30s. That's a struggle.
No offense, but you're wider than 30, Tom.
I'm aware.
As are most adult men.
I'm aware.
You can talk for a while on the ins and outs of navigating 30-inch beds versus 38s versus 40s. No crop, if you're just walking across a field, maybe counting rows or something. That 30's too short. You're like taking choppy steps. A 38 is like perfect for me, and the 40, about every fourth or fifth row, I got to do a little chop step to get back right. I don't know why that 2 inches difference between the 38 and the 40 makes a difference, but I can walk 38s a long way, but the 40 I'm eventually going to have to adjust.
You know, it's just something we do. I try not to complain about it, but man, this time of the year can get a little tough.
I went and searched out Don Monday morning with the sole purpose of saying, hey, man, it's a good week to not be an entomologist, because it was already blazing hot Monday morning about 7:15, and they were making plans of what all they were going to go count. Yeah, good luck with that.
You want me to introduce what we're more or less going to discuss this morning?
Yeah, go ahead.
We're going to talk a little bit about root knot nematode, because I get to this time of the year, spend a lot of time blazing up and down the road, stop at a lot of places to check, dead areas of soybeans. And this is kind of the one thing that I spend a lot of time with Travis Foskey and Trey Price talking about. Root knot continues to be a big issue in this part of the country for a lot of reasons.
Well, you can see it this time of year. Everything's starting to...
And the last
hot,
3 years,
it's dry, it's showing up.
The hot, dry years where we've been irrigating and you start getting areas and fields that are dying off. I mean, I would really suggest get out of the truck, go out there with a shovel and dig up some of those plants to look at the roots of what they're looking like, because there are a lot of places that have shown up in the last. And I said to Jason before we started recording, I've been in Stoneville 17 years now. And there are some fields on this experiment station that have a pretty healthy root knot component, and you really have been able to pick them out the last 3 years.
So if I've got an irrigated field that has an area in it that looks like basically drought stress, then that's probably a good area to go check out.
That would be a spectacular place to go look. And stick the shovel in the ground, dig them up, and if you pull roots out that look like they're a carrot or a knuckle, and you might, and this is the thing I tried to impress upon Corey this morning, sometimes the deadest plants are not the best ones to look at. Pull the green plants up on the outside of the area, and a lot of times you'll see more root knot on those because they're healthy plants, and obviously the nematode wants to feed on a healthy plant.
But you need to dig those up. You don't need to just pull them out of the ground.
Don't
right?
jerk them out of the ground. And then the other thing is to really key on, you can have some foliage symptoms that'll be the classical interveinal chlorosis. The hard part about that is you can confuse it with fungicide phytotoxicity. I've had lots of pictures and videos show up the last couple of weeks where people have been questioning, do I have taproot decline? And I will say you can find some areas where there are some larger clustered areas of taproot decline, but this would be pickup truck size dead areas in fields typically, or declining or crashing, or they look unhealthy because they look drought stressed. They'll look like something like that. And then the other thing to key on, you can get white fungal growth at the base of the plant that will be the classical southern blight. But if you're going to send pictures of that, and I've had this in the last couple of days, hey, what's wrong with the plant? And I'm like, well, what do the roots look like? Because you can get a secondary fungal growth from that organism in a root knot field. They tend to be kind of symbiotic with one another.
Digging up a plant and looking at it, before we get too far away from that, how do I differentiate root knot from soybean nodules?
Squeeze them. Nodule's going to burst like a big old nasty pimple. Or cut it open. The inside of that thing will be pink if it's still an active nodule. A root knot gall will basically be the root, and you'll squeeze it and it'll be hard. It's not going to burst like a pimple or whatever else you want to say. And I realize that's a groated comment, but it'll be pretty firm. And the other thing is, and you and I've talked about this when Bobby was still here, in a lot of cases, when you dig those roots up, you'll have a lot of soil that'll still be attached to it. So, bang it against the side of the shovel and see what knocks off of that. Because sometimes the soil will cover up that galling that's on those roots. Rinse them off if there's still water in the poly pipe. Come up with some way to kind of get that off of there to look at that root. Or if you're going to take a picture and send a picture, that's a good way to do that. That's usually what I do.
I remembered you saying that. I'd forgotten about that part. That's a pretty good indicator, because a healthy plant, even soybean plant with nodules on it, most of that soil is going to come off.
That's right. And, the dead plants, they're going to be shorter, browned out, pretty fragile even when you dig them out of there. In a lot of cases, that root will have completely degraded to just about nothing. There's plenty of decent pictures online of that.
So root knot versus, and I'm thinking about just root symptomology, root knot versus taproot decline. I'm going to have galls.
Yep.
I may have a similar area in the field, so the above ground area may be similar, but the below ground, I'm going to have galls for root knot. And with taproot decline, I'm just going to have...
You'll have a degraded root with a bunch of black fungal growth on there.
I'm going to have taproot decline.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. And you mentioned southern blight, so that would be fungal growth around
white
the
fungal
base
growth
of the plant.
at the base of the plant or the crown moving up the stem. And then if you get it in the perfect situation, you'll have sclerotia there, the little Dippin' Dots part that are present on the fungal growth or even on the soil. And some cases, and I should say, you can dig it out of the ground and it'll be below the soil.
Well, that's what I was going to say, root symptoms for southern blight possibly. Okay, what else? If I see an area in the field that I suspect may be root knot, what else could it possibly be? Just based on the fact that, hey, here's an area that's declining in the field.
You could have a different nematode that's there, and then you're not going to see outward symptom expression or the signs of the nematode on the root itself. And then that, stick a probe in the ground, send a soil sample off to Clarissa and Starkville and have them analyze that. That's about the best thing I can suggest.
So root knot's really the only one I can diagnose looking at plants in the field.
Without a hand lens, and if your eyes are pretty good, you're not going to mistake the galling for something else. If you run across a soybean cyst nematode issue, you can have some similar symptom expression in the upper canopy, interveinal chlorosis. It'll be harder to see the cysts on roots. And it may look like classic sudden death because, again, sudden death and soybean cyst nematode are symbiotic. You can end up with a situation where you'll have both. And I realize that's confusing. That's part of the smoke and mirrors behind plant pathology and nematology.
Well, but I think this time of year around here, it's not hard to find small to mid-sized dead areas in a soybean field that warrant going and looking at and investigating.
And especially given as hot and dry as it's been and how much irrigation we've had to put out and the rest of that. We've pushed plants in some places and they'll crash. I mean, you know that. Don't necessarily need to point that out so much, but those are good places to go investigate. Put your feet in the field, walk out there and look and see what is going on in that spot, because that then will help define what you need to do for next year.
Everything we've talked about, aside from the other diseases that could possibly cause these dead areas, would apply to cotton too. So going to that area, getting the plant around the margin of where the plants are starting to turn yellow into possibly dead if it's severe enough. Dig a plant up and look for the galls on the root.
That's right. They're not as prominent on a cotton root as what they will be on soybeans, but you'll still see them.
But you don't have the nodules there to...
That's right. To confuse you.
Right.
Yeah, because that's an easy thing to mistake, is looking at that nodule and thinking, am I looking at a gall or is this an actual nodule on the root?
All right, in a cotton field, same question I posed for soybeans, but in a cotton field, what other things could that sick to dead area possibly be?
You might have fusarium wilt. You might have verticillium wilt. And we toss those around interchangeably. They're going to produce different symptoms within or staining within the actual main stem. Could be a lightning strike. But some of those plants will probably develop more classic nutritional deficiency issues is usually what happens if it's a severe enough nematode problem. Cotton's pretty showy when it comes to showing that nutritional symptomology in the actual foliage.
But all those things you just listed are much less common than root knot nematode.
They are much less common, especially in our part. I've only seen fusarium wilt that I would have classified as fusarium wilt one time in this state. I don't necessarily see verticillium wilt in Mississippi. I do get calls about it. And then we've talked, and I say we being those of us that look at crops in Mississippi, lots of crop consultants, myself and some other folks talked about the old classic bronze wilt, and I'm not a bronze wilt believer. There's no organism that's caused that, and you could tilt your head in one direction or another and look at some plants and say that that's bronze wilt affecting those. I don't know how to really classify that other than reading the literature and looking at it. And in lots of cases, there are other things that are causing that particular symptom expression in the field.
So we're talking about root knot nematodes late season because the areas are oftentimes easy to see. Certainly easier to see for no other reason than you got a bigger canopy, and where those areas start to decline, you can see them from further away, whereas earlier season when you don't have as much green foliage there, it'd be harder to see. So it's important to talk about it this time of year for that very reason. Naturally, there's nothing we can do about it right now, but it's good to take note of the areas and maybe plan for your soil sampling later on in the year. So then let's transition to management, Tom. What are our management options for root knot nematode?
Well, and I know I said to you before we started this, and this is the thing that buzzing up and down the road I thought about most recently. I think plant pathologists have done a horrible job. We talk about rotation, and I think lots of people key on the word rotation. Well, I rotated. So I had corn. I went to cotton. I had cotton. I went to corn. I put soybeans in there. All of those are going to be a host of the root knot nematode. So you have, in fact, rotated, but you've not chosen the best rotation. And I know we even talked about economically that can be difficult in some cases, because something like peanut would be a great rotation, but people don't have the equipment in some cases to put peanut in there.
And it's equipment, it's experience.
That's right.
It's marketability. It's all of the above.
Yeah, because the other one we talked about was grain sorghum. Excellent rotational strategy. Don't necessarily have the market to carry that. And there are some other economic issues
management problems
from a management standpoint that make grain sorghum really problematic. Honestly, if you're growing soybeans, choose a resistant soybean variety or choose something that's resistant and then tack on a seed treatment. And we can talk about in-furrow strategies. Cotton, obviously, AgLogic's Aldicarb, which would be formerly Temic, good option. Lots of people don't necessarily have insecticide boxes still on their planter, so they can't do that. Vellum is a good option as an in-furrow management strategy. Again, lots of people don't have the in-furrow capability.
But both of those would fall into the category of suppression rather than control.
That's right. The main take-home point, I think, is long-range strategy is best because you're not going to fix a big rip-roaring root knot issue overnight. And just ignoring it by planting, say, a susceptible soybean variety is just going to compound the issue moving forward, because you need to consider like a 5-year plan about how do I effectively manage this year in and year out. So several years of a resistant variety will definitely be helpful, because in the long run, that will reduce your population numbers as you move forward. Because like I said, we don't do a good job talking about the rotational strategies, and people choose a rotational host, but then they're putting in a susceptible host because they used the word rotation and they went from soybeans to corn or soybeans to cotton or one of those other ones. And all that does is increase the number of nematodes present in the soil for you to deal with next year. So when you, for example, put in any other susceptible soybean variety, your area looks larger. So your populations are increasing, your yields decreasing. So moving forward, choosing a resistant variety of either soybean or cotton would be effective. And to my knowledge, there really aren't any marketed resistant corn varieties, and that's pretty problematic.
So the rotation, unfortunately, with the majority of folks in the majority of the Delta counties, with the crop mix that we have, this is just not an option.
It's a big wash, unfortunately.
You know, there may be some scenarios where you could rotate rice in, particularly fur irrigated rice, on some of those fields.
That's right.
But broadly speaking, the soil texture is not going to lend itself to excellent rice production. Is that accurate?
Yeah, because I should have pointed out the main key in fields that have a root knot component tends to be the presence of a more coarse soil component. So you have sand present, which would be like beach sand, but not a beach sand soil, but you have sand present in there. So it's pretty gritty.
Yeah, which we know rice doesn't do well on, because even for irrigated rice, you just can't get
No, you're not going to be able to get enough water.
In my opinion, that's an argument for a different day.
And then if you end up with another year in 2025 like we've had in 2024, you're not going to be able to push enough water across it.
So with our crop mix, we can acknowledge rotation being an optimum management strategy, not realistic for our crop mix and most of our folks. So then we're to resistant varieties. Resistant
varieties are an integrated approach. You could choose something that might not necessarily be marketed as completely resistant. It has some moderate resistance, add a seed treatment to that.
Right.
Or add an in-furrow strategy that will help reduce those numbers overall, because that's what's important. And the thing we don't talk about enough is resistance in the nematode world is based on no reproduction of the nematode on that plant. That would be a resistant host. So most things probably tend to be more moderately resistant. You may still have some reproduction, but it's not going to be to the level that you would have on something that's susceptible.
In a corn and soybean rotation, you said that there's really no resistance in our corn hybrids. So in that situation, you'd want a resistant soybean variety. That's
correct.
That's correct for your environment. A good variety that's also resistant, and then add a seed treatment to that, because in that corn soybean rotation, the only suppression you're getting is during the soybean year.
That's right.
And then in a soybean cotton rotation, definitely resistant varieties on both years of the rotation, so the cotton and the soybean, and then maybe have the option of adding that extra integrated level on the soybean or the cotton, say for the sake of argument, the guy does have insecticide boxes. He could drop the Ag Logic on there in the cotton year, plus have the resistant variety and then the resistant variety in the soybean year. And that would look similar in a corn cotton rotation. You just need to stack it up.
That's right.
On the cotton year to help out for the corn year.
And planning for that, because I know it's a difficult strategy to talk about, but it definitely takes some, pencil on a piece of paper to sketch that out and figure out how you need to do that moving forward. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do and strategize. But pick up the phone and call and ask. Track down Travis's data from Arkansas, because I know Travis does a really good job of looking at which varieties in the soybean world are resistant. And then there are some other places where they do look at some more cotton varieties to evaluate that. Ask, please, call, ask. I can put you in touch with those folks. They'd be more than happy to talk to you, or I'll track their data down, because it's meaningful and it's important even in some of our environments.
Talking about the varieties, whether it's cotton or soybeans, and then the added, whether seed treatment or at planting treatment, whether it be Ag Logic or Vellum, I think it's important in this area of the country, just the way our farms are, and some of those rotation strategies, we don't have to get into detail, but some of those rotation strategies are dictated above the level of the grower, thinking about leased land in particular. So that really reduces the options. We already have a problem with the crop mixes that grow optimally here, major row crops, corn, cotton, and soybeans, and then rice, which we've already talked about, doesn't really fit into these scenarios. So I think talking about the varieties and that added layer of defense with the other inputs is important, because, like I said, some of those decisions are beyond our control.
Yeah, and it's dictated by market, because unfortunately some of those...
certainly market always plays into it.
Some of those added in-furrow products are expensive, but they are helpful, and you need to be considering what you're doing in 2025 and how that may impact you in, say, for example, 2028, because that's going to be important moving forward to at least help manage that in a 5-year strategy.
What's your parting shot on root knot nematode?
I'd say parting shot is, like I indicated, get out there and look at those areas and see what it is. If you think you need to submit a sample to define that area more broadly, that's something that can be explored. But, in most of those instances where we're looking at galled roots, your numbers are above economic threshold at that standpoint. So you need to strategize for the future to determine how to reduce that population moving forward. It's about the best thing that I can state.
Tom, thanks for slowing down for a second this morning and talking about this. And nematodes, again, this is not the time of the year where we're addressing management of nematodes, but again, I think it's important to talk about it this time of year, because this is the time where you can visibly see the problem, or if it's severe enough, can see the problem.
And mark those fields and strategize those fields where you think you have an issue, and define then how to effectively manage that moving forward. It's about the best thing that you can do right now while there's a little lull right before harvest.
The Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.